Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily. It is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024, and today we are going to talk about making the leap from part-time to full-time farming. We're also going to talk about an ag product that's had a pretty rough year. First though, why I have backed off of winter farming. So let's do it. So the stories that continue to pour out of the hurricane aftermath remain heartbreaking. There are hundreds of people still unaccounted for, and access to a lot of these mountainous areas is still completely cut off. So some of these people are just kind of stuck and nobody can get to them. Cell phone service is spotty and hundreds of thousands of people are still without power. PowerOutage.us is a good source to see just how many people are being affected by that. Being thrust into a situation like that is at very best horrible and scary, and at worst life-threatening and dangerous. We think of farmers in particular as pretty resilient, but losing systems you rely on is hard for literally anyone. When Hannah and I first set off on our own as farmers, we got a chance to farm some family land. This family land had multiple houses, and so we were staying in one house until one day they asked us to leave that house and move into another house. The house they asked us to move into, however, had no electricity, no running water yet. It was going to be installed in a few days, but it wasn't there yet. And when we brought this up to the landowners, they were like, yeah, you've lived off-grid before, you'll handle it. You got it. But here's the thing. Living off-grid takes not only infrastructure, but an enormous amount of planning. Yes, we lived off-grid for a couple of years leading up to that point, but when we were doing that, we had a spring for water and systems to manage light and cooking and refrigeration and sanitation and all the normal things that life requires. And I use that not at all comparable story just to illustrate that being thrown into a situation where there is no electricity or running water, moreover, a situation where your well water may be contaminated from the flooding, is profoundly difficult for absolutely anyone. And our hearts are with everyone going through that right now. I hope those folks and farmers in the affected areas know we're thinking of them. Wednesday is generally a midweek harvest day for us, which is always bananas, but especially now that I've started this show. At some point soon, I will talk a bit more about my farm because a couple of people have asked the obvious question, how are you finding the time for this show and farming? And for now, the simple answer is we're not really going that hard at the winter. Pretty easy. There are a few reasons that I pulled back from winter the last couple of years, and none of them are because there isn't a good market for winter produce. There definitely is. Winter produce is in high demand, absolutely. Winter production is relatively low maintenance, and I like that you just basically plant something around now or a little earlier, and then you harvest it all winter with only a couple successions. So I love winter farming for other people, and I love winter farming for my family. I actually think it is a completely underutilized growing period, which is why we dedicated a whole podcast series to it with the Winter Growers Podcast with Clara Coleman. But here's a quick rundown of why we on our farm have pulled back on winter production. First, in order to have a good winter farm, you need good winter infrastructure. A warm, dry place to wash the produce and a reliable water line that won't freeze is absolutely essential. We would have to do some relatively substantial plumbing to make that possible, which we could do. We could make that investment, but there are other reasons that we have slowed down on the winter that make that investment make less sense for us. Rest is part of it. As you can probably guess, I basically just work, and then when I'm done working or I finish a job, I just work more. For example, I do no-till growers in the morning from roughly like 3 to 8 a.m., and then farm all day until like 2 or 3, and then coach soccer at night and on the weekends, which doesn't count as work technically because I don't get paid for it, but I still take it seriously and plan out my training sessions in profoundly nerdy ways in great detail, like it's a job, because I can't help myself. And I love coaching the kids and being around the sport, so I do a lot. In the winter, it's nice to pull back from something. When I was younger, it was also easier to be out there in freezing weather, barely able to feel my hands or toes, whereas now I don't necessarily mind that part mentally, but I've noticed the cold makes me very slow and inefficient in ways it didn't really used to, or I just don't have that same fire that kind of keeps you warm. I kind of like to enjoy my farm now and not have it look like an absolute blur around me at all times because I'm just focused and working really hard. Also, if we had a year-round employee, we would likely still farm all winter. We'd likely have to. Our last employee, shout out to Greg, liked to change things up in the winter, and so he would do seasonal work from like October through March. So that worked out for both parties. That's part of why we did not take on another employee this spring. We didn't want to offer a job that ended in October, nor did we want to be forced to farm all winter, which can be tricky because unlike the summer, where you can rebound within a few weeks from a crop loss, say of lettuce, but if you lose a lettuce crop in the winter, you lost that crop for the entire winter. Nothing really grows until February, so rebounding is slow, if possible at all. But again, more on that decision not to hire another employee in a later episode. I guess that's a reasonable segue to say, make sure to like and subscribe and follow wherever you're listening or hearing this or seeing it. Listening and hearing are probably still the same thing. I'll check on that later. So anyway, not going to go hard at the winter means I can try and get this show off the ground and hopefully hire a producer by the spring. If not, things could get interesting. So get your popcorn ready. Oh, I should do a popcorn growing episode at some point. I love growing popcorn, and my kids actually call it popcorn when I cook it because I guess, as they say, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Next, we're going to get a question from one of our Patreon members about scaling up to farming full-time. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I just want to give a shout out to the people that made this mug, which is East Fork Pottery in Asheville. They are doing really amazing work with the flood and directing people to food and that sort of stuff. So shout out to all the people in Asheville, including East Fork, who are doing that great work and helping people. All right, so as always, Patreon members get first dibs on questions. You can join the Patreon page and get your questions into our monthly show thread at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Again, that doesn't mean I won't get to YouTube questions, but at this rate, it could be a while because I said that really country. It could be a while because our Patreon members are on it and asking lots of really great questions. Patreon member Alex Smith, for instance, of Crop Culture Farm asks, I'd love some advice and wisdom on a part-time farmer making the jump to full-time farming, how best to expand production for new sales, how to get those new sales, and how to adjust the financials for that leap. Asking for a friend. All right, so I'm going to do a classic Farmer Jesse video on this idea of going from backyard to farmer's scale soon. And like I said yesterday or the day before, we also did a video with Wild East Farm and Cedar Chest Farm on this same subject, kind of a roundtable at the OGS Organic Growers School Conference in March. But Alec asks a couple specific questions I thought were interesting here. Also, that FJ video won't be for the podcast, so I wanted to start here for you podcast-only folks. I also figured I could maybe hear some of your feedback and ideas and stories of your own about scaling up before shooting that video, because I don't, and frankly can't, think of all the good ideas and have all the good advice. So if you have feedback on this or any of our episodes, make sure to hit up the comments section on YouTube for this video, or the No-Till Growers forum, or the Patreon page where I am the most attentive, or there's also the No-Till Growers Instagram. It will be physically impossible, obviously, for me to respond to everyone, but just know that I appreciate all of your contributions, and I try to keep an eye out and at least read them and try to respond to as many as I can. It does sincerely pain me to not be able to respond to everyone, but Patreon is definitely where I'm most likely to respond out of my big time appreciation for you all coming out of your pocket to support this work. Alex's questions for their friend are how to expand production for new sales, how to get those new sales, and how to adjust the financials for that leap. Okay, so let's break those out individually, starting with how best to expand production for new sales. First, begin with investigating how much of the crop do you reasonably think you can sell. Like when we come up short for a lettuce order in the middle of the summer, I think, okay, I had 75 pounds available, but chefs and retailers were asking for roughly 125 total pounds, for example. And I could have sold an extra 25 pounds at market. So I need to grow 75 more pounds of lettuce at this time of year. For me, that's one additional 4-foot by 50-foot bed of Salanova lettuce. Though I should say in the summer, yields can be tricky, so I may account for another half of a bed just in case. It is usually not very hard to sell excess lettuce in the summer, so the more the merrier. If I don't know how much more they can take, that's because I was not fully engaging with them enough during the growing season. This can be tricky. I'm not going to pretend it's easy for every customer. Asking a busy customer in the summer can be tough, but asking that same customer what they could have used more of in August when it's December is also not going to be necessarily very helpful. My advice would be to just during the season ask very simple questions while also not bogging the customer down. Like, don't take up a bunch of chef's time when they're super busy. Just be observant and take notes. Ask yourself, what was it they mentioned not having enough of? Or they asked me if I had any fairy tale eggplant. Maybe I can fit that onto the crop plan for next year or something like that. One thing we do a lot in soccer coaching, now there's a segue if ever there was one, is that we reflect on the practice or game after it's done. This is something we do intentionally. And they have systems for this, like the stoplight method, where you ask, what should I stop doing, representing the red light? What should I continue doing, the yellow light, although you're supposed to slow down at a yellow light, but let's not get into that. And then what should I start doing, the green light? I think that same thing, or at least some sort of reflection, should be done at least a few times a week for farmers, just to take notes about what went well, what didn't, and any relevant customer feedback for the following season. Paper and pad is fine, but I like Google Docs or any word processor so you can easily search them later on for keywords like lettuce, or you can look at them on your laptop or your phone or whatever device you happen to have in front of you. And then you can also share that document with other people. Second part of Alex's question of how to get those new sales is a complicated one. Do you want to diversify your outlets, or do you want to expand on the outlets you already have? Assuming by part-time farmer, you mean that you are already selling some amount of produce. Growers Daily will, over time, cover every outlet from CSAs to farmers markets, etc. For our purposes today, though, you will have to choose a complementary outlet to what you're already doing. Generally, I like a small amount of diversification in my marketing streams. We all saw in 2020 where a massive disruption like a pandemic can make certain outlets like restaurants disappear almost overnight. Those who already had CSAs or online sales or were sort of in the position to pivot to that, however, were able to pivot much easier and more quickly. A massive economic disruption like the 2008 recession could likewise lead people away from high upfront costs like a CSA and more towards farmers markets and retail outlets where they can pick and choose exactly what they want and save a little cash. There is no strength like diversification, not in marketing outlets, not in nature, not in society, not in a conversation with a friend, not in a bowl of cereal. Like, what am I supposed to spell with all these O's, Fruit Loops? I mean, it's absurd. Anyway, I always liked doing a farmer's market in complement to other outlets because a farmer's market is a place where you can sell excessive produce and there's almost no expectation. Take summer squash, for example. If you're a CSA, you can give it for 2 weeks and then take 2 weeks off, just bringing that to market, and then give it again in the CSA later on. Rinse and repeat until the squash is done. CSA members don't want 10 straight weeks of squash. They just don't. But you also don't want to rip those plants out after 2 weeks. So having those two outlets allows you to split up the harvest a little bit more. Farmers markets can prove to be an excellent outlet for crops that just keep coming, but that customers only want a few times, or at least not like a bunch of times in a row. Unlike every other sales outlet where the customer is expecting what they ordered, at farmers markets and to a lesser extent farm stores, no one has ordered anything, so you just bring what you have. It's really nice. It's low stress. Low stress, at least in that way. It's not as easy to move excess produce to chefs or retailers or even CSAs as it is to move in farmers markets and farm stores. The last part of Alex's question is how to adjust the financials for that leap. For me, everything that has to do with finances starts with the family and farm budget. You need to know how much you or your family needs to earn every month. You also need to know how much it costs to operate your farm, adjusted for additional expenses like more compost and seeds for the increased production. That will give you an idea of how much more you need to earn, and then you can figure it out from there. So if you need to earn an extra $20,000 a year to make it worth cutting back on other paying work to focus more on the farm, is it possible given your markets? Do you have enough land base to increase production? Do you have enough time? Do you have enough capital to invest in the compost, seeds, infrastructure, etc.? In other words, can you make the math? What are the limitations? Now, you likely won't be able to think of everything that could come up financially, but if you can get close and the risk of, say, bankrupting your family is non-existent, then you can start to scale up and adjust as you go. A big mistake I don't want anyone to make is to quit their jobs and take that leap to full-time farming without a really well thought out marketing and production plan, plus preferably some good growing experience. So in that way, I do think making the leap from backyard to part-time farming to full-time farming is a great approach. In fact, I would almost say it should be considered a strategy, especially if you can't just quit your job and go work on a farm for a few years. This is a complicated and difficult business. Start small, scale as you can. Obviously, I do not have a monopoly on all the best advice or experience. So again, make sure to leave a comment wherever you can leave comments. I'll share some listener feedback on this episode and other episodes as it comes in. Oh, and you should check out this book too. There it is. I'm holding it up for the YouTube audience, but it is the Organic Farmer's Business Handbook by Richard Wiswall. It's a classic. Every farmer needs to own this book, and I will put a link in the show notes for it. All right, in the next segment, we're going to hear about an ag product that has not had the best of summers and how that's going to affect like a huge sector of agriculture. Be right back.
So our work has always been about keeping farming information as free and open to the public as we possibly can, and that won't change. One way in which we make that possible, though, is through advertising on podcasts like this, on our YouTube channel, on our forum, and so on. So if you are a small farm-related company selling seeds or tools or something growers could use, or if you're an organization putting on some conference or something else farm-related that I'm not thinking of, get in touch with us at Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. That's Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Supporting us helps to grow this work and grow farmers. So we all thank you. Again, that email is farmermichelle at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can find our contact information at no-tillgrowers.com. All right. Thanks, you all. Enjoy the show.
Okay, so we may not always think about alcohol as an ag product, but according to the California Grape Acreage Report 2020 summary, in California alone, quote, the wine type grape acreage is estimated at 620,000 acres. Of the total acres, 580,000 were bearing and 40,000 were non-bearing, end quote. And non-bearing just meaning not yet producing or no longer producing, etc. Okay, so to put that quote in perspective, the state of Rhode Island is roughly 770,000 acres. So the acreage of wine grapes in California alone is roughly the size of our smallest state. And again, that's just California and just wine grapes. That doesn't include thousands of acres of apples for hard cider, or pears for perry, or grains for beer, or corn for whiskey, or rice for sake, or blackberries and etc. for country wines. And it doesn't include wine grapes in any other state. In other words, we dedicate no small amount of space to the production of the raw ingredients of alcoholic beverages here in the US, which was fine until basically 2024, when a few really large studies began to drop that were like, yeah, you remember how we said drinking might have some health benefits back in the early aughts? About that. In the name of full disclosure, I quit drinking this year, but it had nothing to do with these reports. And I am not going on a crusade to get people to drink or not drink. Truly, I don't care. Before I quit drinking, I loved beer and wine, and anyone who has watched my YouTube channel can attest to that, and probably would have kept drinking despite these reports if a single beer didn't start to make me feel like complete death every morning and started to really mess with my brain. It was very annoying and inconvenient, but I just felt obliged to mention that I quit drinking, but also that I genuinely have nothing against drinking, so it doesn't sound like I'm promoting some anti-booze dogma or agenda. I'm not. Unless someone pays me to, which hasn't happened. So drink away responsibly, of course. But I'm fascinated not only with the new research, but the fact that it so dramatically explodes what we've been told since like the mid-aughts, that a little bit of alcohol can actually be good for you. Like the 2008 New York Times article titled "New Hints Seen That Red Wine May Slow Aging." I remember these headlines well because in the early and mid-aughts, I was working in wine sales, and these stories were freaking fantastic for business. But headlines are not reality, right? The studies that sparked that particular headline were not even all that compelling. They were done on mice, which it turns out are not humans. And in fact, studies on mice and rats called mirroring studies do not always, or perhaps even often, translate all that well to humans. And these studies were done on the chemical compound resveratrol found in wine, not on the wines themselves. When the mice were megadosed with this resveratrol, the researchers in 2008 found lots of health benefits to the mice. Quote, in earlier studies of mice on treadmills, the animals were fed such large amounts of resveratrol that to gain equivalent dosages, people would have to drink more than 100 bottles of red wine a day. The paper goes on to say that in this new research, however, quote, the Wisconsin scientists used a dose on mice equivalent to just 35 bottles a day, but red wine contains many other resveratrol-like compounds that may also be beneficial. Taking these into account, as well as mice's higher metabolic rate, a mere 4 5-ounce glasses of wine starts getting close to the amount of resveratrol they found effective, Dr. Weindruck said, end quote. Just so it's clear, 5 ounces is not a small amount of wine. 5 ounces is basically what a glass of wine is at a restaurant. So almost a whole bottle of wine starts getting you close to the mouse dose that they saw to be beneficial to mice, which is a sweet deal if you enjoy some antioxidants with your hangover. Later in the paper, the earlier researchers cast doubt on the idea that such a small dose like almost an entire bottle of wine, could have effects. But perhaps this particular researcher couldn't help but hint, based on his studies, that if you drink 4 glasses of wine a day, you may see some similar benefits. But anyway, flash forward a decade and a half now to research being done on hundreds of thousands of actual human beings, and the results are not quite as glowy. A New York Times article from August titled "Older Adults Do Not Benefit from Moderate Drinking, Large Study Finds," which has to ironically be one of the most sober headlines of all time. Quote, overall moderate drinking defined as between 20 and 40 grams of alcohol daily for men and between 10 and 20 grams for women, which like 20 grams is not even an ounce. But anyway, that small amount was associated with a higher risk of death from all causes and a higher risk of dying of cancer, end quote. I mean, death is one way to slow aging, so I do want to be fair there, but like maybe not the best. This study was 135,000 human participants, which one is not a small study, and two, humans are generally better than mice at predicting health outcomes for other humans. Then last month, we got a new report called the AACR Cancer Progress Report that found, quote, excessive levels of alcohol consumption increase the risk of 6 different types of cancer and is linked to more than 200 diseases in the United States. 5.4% of cancers were attributed to alcohol consumption in 2019, the most recent year for which data are available. End quote. So what does all that have to do with farming? Well, either all of this will blow over and no one will care, which is fine, or we are on the precipice of the public looking at alcohol somewhat like we currently look at smoking, albeit probably to a smaller degree, though there is talk of warning labels on the backs of wine bottles and such that are similar to those on the back of cigarette packets, according to Stat News. The evidence labels are effective is not particularly robust, but these ideas do tend to embed themselves in the culture and potentially have a slow-moving but large effect. Sticking with tobacco, between 1991 and 2021, rates of smoking decreased from 70.1% in 1991 to 17.8% in 2021, according to research from Florida Atlantic University. But tobacco's decline is relevant because tobacco production in the U.S., who I believe is still the world's leader in tobacco production, went from over 93,000 farms in 1997 to about 3,000 farms in 2022. But that could be explained by farm consolidation. What cannot be explained by farm consolidation is that U.S. farms harvested about 431.6 million pounds of tobacco in 2022, down from 1.74 billion pounds in 1997, according to the CDC. So a decline in tobacco use has created a massive decline in tobacco production. Ecologically speaking, probably for the better, because tobacco production is often ecologically disastrous, but this is largely because of the strong association of tobacco with cancer. In other words, if alcohol is slowly becoming the new tobacco, and to be clear, tobacco, as far as I can tell, is still much worse than alcohol in terms of its relationship to cancers. But if alcohol is slowly gaining that reputation, how will that change in public perception affect the agriculture around alcohol in the U.S. in the next 25 years? Yeah, sorry, I read a bunch of stats and quotes just to get to that. How will things change if this is the direction that we're headed? Well, no one really knows, or at least I haven't seen that sort of research yet. From my many friends in alcohol-based industries, whom I dearly love, I hope whatever happens is positive. I think that if there is a decline in alcohol usage on a large scale, I believe we will see some farms pivot what they grow, but also more interestingly to me is that we could see some farms pivot what they do with the fruit they already grow. I suspect a continued rise in non-alcoholic, or as a recent server at a restaurant we were at called it, alcohol removed, presumably from the connotation that one has to have been an alcoholic to enjoy a non-alcoholic beverage. Anyway, beverages made from those same juices and sold at grocery stores and restaurants, or even specialty stores like Spirited Away in New York City that sells, you guessed it, only alcohol-free products, presumably with famous actors doing the voiceovers, which is a ridiculously niche joke, so my apologies. Anyway, those non-alcoholic beverages will likely continue to trend. And here's where there is perhaps a boon for small-scale growers. It is a heck of a lot easier and less expensive to get a license to make juice than it is to get a license to make alcohol. And assuming we can do a little silver lining thing here, this could open up opportunities for small-scale growers to have local organic mocktail at their market booths to like sell their own. I mean, it could open up the door for whole mocktail and juice farms. Now, I am sure someone is asking something like, one, is there enough demand for that? I have no idea. Maybe in the future. And then someone else is maybe asking, but what about the Mediterranean diet? I'm not going to talk a lot about health on here, but I will say that if you exercise a lot and eat fresher, healthier foods, as Europeans often do, plus you maintain good relationships in your life, you will probably be healthier in general. So a small, moderate amount of alcohol will likely not be as dangerous. And who knows, we may learn there are certain groups more profoundly affected by alcohol than others, but the studies are pretty clear so far that it's not likely the healthy part of that diet. Anyway, maybe this whole alcohol dramatically increases your risk of cancer, among other forms of death kerfluffle will just blow over. But if not, there is at least some silver lining there for agriculture. Humans like to imbibe something when they socialize and eat. Might as well be from your farm, right? Now, feel free to let me know where I'm right, where I'm wrong, or anywhere in between in the comment section, or like I said, wherever that makes sense for you. If you want to support and grow this little seed of a show, join us over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, another good place to discuss these things. I will shout out every new Patreon member who signs up in the month of October. A couple other ways to support the show is to simply share it with friends. That's super helpful. Let people know that you are listening to it and that you're enjoying it. Also, you can snag a copy of the Living Soil Handbook over at no-tillgrowers.com, or a hat, or excitingly, Dan Brisebois's new book. He is the host of the Seed Farmer podcast. It's coming. His new book will be out in November, like next month. And you can pre-order it through no-tillgrowers.com to support our work and support Dan and get an awesome new book about producing seeds on small market farms. I'll also have Dan on here at some point to chat about that. And a huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Any ideas or listener feedback, let me know. Otherwise, that's it for Growers Daily today. I will see you back here tomorrow, bright and afternoony, and we'll close out with our Patreon shout-outs. So huge shout-out today to these new and bumped-up subscribers. Andrew Kirch, Kristen, oh, I'm so sorry, Kristen. Kristen Watchloggle, nailed it. Jen, Heidi Court, and Judith Berg. Thank you all for joining this week. You all are awesome. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching or listening.